assurance, not absolute assurance, because we do not look at every transaction inside the district. There's no way that we could feasibly do that without a huge fee. It is not an internal control audit, nor is it a fraud audit, so you cannot rely on it for those things. In planning the audit, we use a risk-based model, which means we gain an understanding of your internal controls, we make inquiries about fraud, and anything that would come to light from a fraud perspective, we would let you know about. But as we learn about your internal controls, we decide which areas are the most, areas that need more attention. So we'll go through a revenue cycle or a cash disbursement cycle. We'll look at a purchase order to make sure it was approved, and we'll follow that purchase order directly to an invoice to make sure that the purchase order price matches the invoice price. Then we'll look and see, did somebody approve the invoice? By looking at the invoice, the purchase order, we'll take it to the check. We'll actually say, okay, let me see where that particular invoice was paid. It used to be that we could see who signed the check. We don't get pictures of the checks anymore, but we do make sure that the vendor and the amount come through properly to the bank statement. So we're following it all the way beginning to end. We do the same thing on the revenue cycle. As cash or checks come in, we want to make sure we follow that through. One of the things that we do is we reach out to third parties. Any information that we can get outside of the school system's internal controls or financial reporting system, we try to grab that and incorporate that into our audit. So we'll reach out to the banks. We'll say, XYZ Bank, please send me the balance in these checking accounts or this checking account as of June 30th, 2021. We'll take that, and they send it directly to us. It doesn't go through the financial system at all. And then we take that and we compare it to what we're seeing in the financial statements or the financial reporting system. We'll also do that with your bond confirmations, things like that, just to make sure that we're using outside higher level evidence to support what we're seeing inside here. And again, moving on to the next page, which is the page that everybody really wants to know about, sort of wants to know about. We are issuing a clean opinion on the financial statement. When you see that, you see the term unmodified, which means it's a normal statement. It is, we found no issues. If it were qualified, it would be, well, everything was okay other than blah, blah, blah. So we've given you a clean opinion on the financial statements, a clean opinion on the major federal program. And again, we received excellent cooperation from Jeff and the rest of the staff. This is our second round, as far as information flow. Again, there's an intangible piece of the audit. We asked for probably 15, 16 months worth of stuff anywhere inside of it, just randomly, right? How that comes to us, how quickly it is, our questions, how they're answered, that kind of tells you whether something's going well or not. If they have to spend a lot of time searching, it just means the records might be a little bit out of whack, But when you get timely responses, that's the intangible piece. It's nice to know. Significant accounting policies are discussed in note 1 to this. It's quite a few pages. It defines what are your assets, what are your liabilities, what are your fund balances. It's a lot of fun reading. Internal accounting estimates, the most significant one is the depreciable lives of your capital assets, meaning your buildings, buses, things like that. We look to make sure those are applied consistently year after year. We would be concerned if we saw that a bus was 8 years, one year, and the next year it's 12, and then back to 5, things like that. So we look for consistency of application of that.
And you do that on buildings as well?
We'll look at the buildings, yeah. So we'll test on a building transaction, right? So we'll look at BG1, make sure it's approved not only by the board, but we'll look for KDE's signature. We'll look for the bid recap. Things like that. We'll kind of go into those details of that type of thing. So we didn't have any internal control matters that are considered to be reportable that would need to go up to the federal government or anything like that related to your measure programs or anything that we felt posed a significant issue here where it would be a significant deficiency or a material weakness. We did not find anything like that. We're not aware of any fraud or related illegal acts that require communication. It just did not come to our attention. Again, we don't look at every transaction, so we can't give absolute assurance on that. There also is a representation where the management gives us clear that they've made all evidence, all documents available to us, that they don't have any knowledge of violations of any rules, contracts, things like that as well. And we had no audit adjustments as a result of the financial statements. We always have a few adjustments, but that's because the timing of the retirement system just doesn't come in before July 25th. So here would be if we found an error that we thought should have been corrected by the district. We did not have any of those this time. So at this point, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Morgan and let her talk a little bit about the numbers and graphs.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to start off by saying thanks again for having us here. It was a great year, again, working with Jeff and You know, he, like George said, he responds very timely, and, you know, any of the bookkeepers at the schools or his team at the central office, they were all great again this year, so thanks again. Getting into this first chart here, so we have the statement of net position trends on the district-wide basis. So on the left-hand side, you have your assets and deferred outflows, in the middle, liabilities and deferred inflows, and on the right-hand side, your net position. So of course, you know, if you're comparing just to 2020 for assets and deferred outflows, it is pretty much neck and neck there. And then with liabilities and deferred inflows, you're down slightly, and your net position overall is up slightly, which is a good sign. The next slide here, we have the district-wide net position analysis. So on the left, you'll see the investment in capital assets. And just to kind of give a brief explanation of what that is, so that is your net position that is not available for use, essentially. You know, all of your fixed assets fall under that category there. The restricted piece in the middle, it looks a little odd because it is negative. However, that is mostly your OPEB and pension liabilities and the retirement system. So that's what that is there. And the unassigned is essentially what you have for use at your hand. So, you know, comparing to last year, you're pretty much the same as where you were. The next slide here, we have the revenue over expenses on a district-wide level. So just comparing to the prior year, your revenues and expenses are both up slightly. However, I think it is important to notice that your revenues are above your expenses here. That's what you like to see. And you know, one question that people often ask is that huge jump between 2018 and 2019, and if you all were around and recall, there was a change in the assumptions of the retirement system, so that's what caused that large decrease. But from last year to this year, you had an increase and your revenues are above expenses, which is great.
I have a quick question there.
Sure.
With our revenues being above our expenditures, does that include any ESSER money that would be used to kind of lower expenditures, or is that a true statement of what the expenditures were? I'm not sure if I'm asking the question correctly, but in Woodford, we've been using our ESSER funds to kind of plug our general fund, and we've kind of moved it over, I guess, essentially is what I'm kind of seeing. And so, like for instance, this year, it looks like we're moving $3 million over into contingency from ESSER. Does that account for it as well also, or do you know?
So yeah. So this graph includes all revenues of the district regardless of funds, right? So it could be general fund, special revenue fund, capital outlay, building, you name it, all included here. The ESSER funds, any of the grant revenue that you receive goes into revenue and stays in revenue line. Expenditures all stay in the expenditure line. So there's no netting of revenues and expenses with your grant accounting. So if there were funds that were expended, you know, when you do the federal audit, the compliance audit, you have to spend those. You know, we're looking to see, did you spend them on what was required? Inside the grant, they give you a list of allowable expenses, so that's what we're testing there. And we're making sure that the funds match. You know what I mean? So we can never report more revenue than expenses on this. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does make sense. In our case, I think we had a year that ended, and then there was some kind of recoding. Is that reflected in here? If somebody went back and recoded things, would that
KDE
show?
originally did not report your funds. You know what I mean? They reported your SEEK money, and then came back and said, oh, by the way, this was federal money, which required us to do additional testing because we're required to test either 40% or 20% of your federal funds, depending upon whether you're a low-risk oddity or a high-risk oddity. I believe you are a low-risk oddity.
Yeah.
So we have to pick 20%, but when that top number goes up, we might have had 20% when the original district payment register came out, right? And it was on a lower number, and all of a sudden, KDE decides, oh, by the way, in your SEEK money was really these funds here, they're federal money. We had to go back and reallocate and retest. So any unused funds, you know what I mean, that you have from those grants, you're awarded a dollar amount. Doesn't mean you use that whole dollar amount during the fiscal year. That can be, maybe that's what you're picking up in your contingency, is that, hey, we have X number of ESSER dollars still available to spend for fiscal year 2022. But
So
we don't really audit that.
when you check those expenditures of grant-specific monies, you check to make sure that they have been used for an appropriate use within the guidelines that are given by the federal government.
Correct.
Okay.
So in this case, all of our revenue was reported correctly. The expenses that we've reported have been used appropriately, given the funds that they were charged against.
For the major federal programs that we tested, we don't test everyone.
Right,
Sure,
right,
but
but major federal would include the ESSER funds, would include all those large dollars that we're talking about.
ESSER was definitely included this year because it was classified by the federal government as higher risk, so we had to test that.
Okay.
And at what rate did you test ESSER? Is it the 20 or the 40?
We would have tested over 20%, I don't have the number in front of me, well over 20% of your federal funds. So if you received $10 million, we would have been required to test over $2 million of those funds. I don't have that detail in front of me, but
Okay, I'm looking at your report on one of the back pages, and I'm not sure if I'm reading this right, because I just got it. It looks like you tested, is it 750,000, is that correct?
so that's the determination level, what determines a major,
Gotcha.
type A or type B. So what happens is, we list all of your federal dollars, and we are required, as part of the single audit, to tie those federal dollars into the financial system. So what we're making sure of there is that the federal dollars expended agree to the general ledger on this, it's called a CFA.
Okay,
Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards. So one of our audit steps and requirements is to tie that in to the general ledger. So we do that. Then they have to say, okay, I need you to determine and take a look at all the programs and to say what's type A and what's type B. Anything more than $750,000 is considered type A.
okay,
So that's larger dollars. And that's where they start looking and say, okay, have any of these been audited recently in the last 2 years? And if they have been, that along with probably 10 other questions could lead them to be, hey, that's low risk this year because we've recently looked at it. But you've got new funds, you've got these new grants that come in.
Right.
Sometimes the federal government says, I don't care what it is, that's high risk anyway. And you always have to look at that. That's just what that 750 is.
gotcha.
So there's a whole different work paper we go through, a whole different exercise to determine that. And then we decide from those A programs, which ones are high risk, automatically tested. Some are low risk, right? So if we have 4 low risk, our audit steps then say, well, you've got to test, you've got to at least assess risk on some of the B programs. 1/4 of the low risk, so if we had 4 low risk, we would have to say, well, we've got to at least look through all the Bs and see if there's one that's a high risk.
Gotcha.
And we would determine if we need to test
And
that.
so this is for the fiscal year that ended in 2021.
Correct.
So any funds that were expended from CARES and GEARS, that would be the funds you were looking at. And then if we didn't expend the ESSER funds at that point, you wouldn't be looking at them. You would just be looking at what was expended?
Right.
Okay,
And
okay,
it could be that you have more ESSER funds next year that would qualify.
But all of
Gotcha.
those funds are captured in the revenue
Yes,
as being available for expenditure.
not available, because they're not revenue until you spend it. You know what I mean? So
Okay.
you request reimbursement, you know what I mean? Some of it's coming in different, so you have to, a lot of these are reimbursement type grants. I mean, you show.
Flow
you get-
throughs.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
but basically it would just show years, CARES, anything that was fiscal year 21.
Right.
And then if we had any ESSER that was 21, it would show that, but it wouldn't show anything.
That you have not received.
Yeah,
So
I
your
gotcha,
grant could be, your award could be higher than what you've received to date.
Sure.
gotcha. Makes sense, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to the next slide here. So next we have the balance sheet trends, just looking at the general fund. So looking on the left-hand side, your assets are slightly up from the prior year, and your liabilities are down from the prior year, which is great, and that overall put your fund balance up last year. We do a number of these school district audits, and from what I see across districts, this is a healthy fund balance, so I think you guys should be happy with what you see here.
You pull out the general funds because that's the one you have most control over, right? So the budget, like, they're all designated for securities. This is the one you have most flexibility in how you expend these funds.
The next slide here has the revenues over expenses, again, just for the general fund. So similar to the district-wide, your revenues are above your expenses here, which is great. You know, well, it looks like your expenses went down slightly from the prior year, so, you know, you're finding places to cut costs, which is great, while being able to bring in more revenue, which is great to see here, so. The next couple slides, we look at a few different sources of revenue that are flowing through the general fund. So this first graph here is just the major tax revenues, and of course it's your general property tax. And from 2019 to 2021, you have a steady incline there, which is great. And when we say major, it's just the dollar amount there is,
Sure.
you know, close to 15 million. So your other tax receipts, just three of note here: distilled spirits, motor vehicle, and utilities. Relatively consistent across the past 3 years. So I think that looks great there. Next, we have general fund revenues by source. So this first graph here, you have your state and your taxes. So there's a slight decline in the state, and you know that's typically due to on-behalfs. So no issues there. And your general fund tax revenues again increasing, which is great. And the bottom chart there, we break out earnings on investments, federal and other, just a few other sources of revenue. Your other revenues are increasing. There are a few different groupings that are lumped in there. So, you know, these dollar amounts are less than 400,000, which is very insignificant compared to other revenues in the general fund. And your federal dollars are down slightly, and your earnings on investments are slightly up from the prior year.
So what are some things that would fall into that other category?
Off the top of my head,
Could be if you rent buildings out, other type of, you might have some on behalf, you don't know how to say on behalf, but do you all receive the revenue in lieu of taxes on some things like that? That would fall to that instead of tax revenue.
there are some, if I'm looking at the annual financial report, there are typically some local receipts, small dollar amounts that are grouped in here.
Could be bus roll, could be income from the county for transportation of non-public students.
And
We have lots of shared
Yes.
things with the county on community stadium and things like that. Okay,
And your interfund transfers are also
Sure.
included in that amount.
okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean
No,
to.
that's
No,
okay.
a good question.
On the next slide here, we have revenues over expenses for the proprietary funds, which is majority food service. Of course, you also have the after-school included in there as well. So looking at your expenses, you know, they're up from the prior year. However, you know, much of that is due to COVID and also the retirement system. And then your revenues are down slightly, and again, due to COVID. You know, I don't think there's anything unusual when looking at this graph.
Okay,
And the last slide here, we just give a payroll summary, and you know this is something we put in every year, just to compare you to other districts of your similar size that we audit. So not the entire state of Kentucky,
Okay.
but just so of the 20 or so that we look at. So, you know, and we do that, I think, based on a total revenues amount. So we compare you based on revenues to others within a range. So, you know, looking at your salaries compared to other districts, you're above, which is what people like to see, and that's great. You care about your teachers and paying them good wages. So, and then, you know, the benefits go right along with that. Your on-behalfs are slightly up over the other district average. And then on the right-hand side, you have salary expense as a percent of receipts. You're just slightly above the average of the other districts we look at, which I think is great and in line with what we'd expect. So.
very good. I'm appreciative of this slide. I actually had that question when Mr. Martello was going through the budget presentation. How does our portion that is taken up in payroll can compare. So this is very
Sure.
helpful. Thank you.
So I
Okay.
do have one question,
Sure.
if you don't mind. So this is my first time sitting on the board through an audit, and I just want to make sure that it's similar to other audits that I've been a part of. So once this is done, the year is effectively closed out. You can't go back and restate anything. You can't recode, or can you make changes once the audit is done without sort of reopening the period for you to re-audit?
So if you were to make changes in your system, we would see that next year. It would
Mhm.
throw off, as we call
Right.
it, rolling forward from the prior year.
Right.
So that would cause us to look into, what happened here. And
Yeah.
essentially, possibly then a restatement would have to occur depending on the extent.
Right. And were there any, I would assume that you would have to report any subsequent transactions if that happened during the audit. When we were to say, make a restatement of anything, we would have to tell you that so that you could reflect that in the audited financial statements.
So anytime, like let's say we're into 2022 and there was an error that was undetected, but now you became aware of. We would want to see that, we would want to understand the evidence, the audit evidence behind it. We could then either go back and restate, or we would have a restatement of the beginning balance. You know what I mean? And there would
Sure.
be what's called a prior period adjustment.
Right.
We would have a footnote in here. There's a subsequent event footnote that tells you that we've looked at subsequent events through X date. You know, so those are all great questions, but yes.
And without
So-
looking through all the, what was the date of the subsequent event?
November
cut
12th.
off? I'm sorry?
November 12th.
November 12th. So any transaction really that occurred from July 1 to November 12 would have been disclosed to you and included as part of this review
If it rose to the level
of the
being
materiality.
disclosed,
Yeah,
yes, exactly.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
So I would ask, because of the way our meeting was scheduled and you guys having an opportunity to wrap up your work, I think for next month, I would like to add the audit so that we have time to review things, and if the board members have any questions, not specifically for you guys, I'm sure Mr. Martello can address most of them, anything that we may have, because it's a lot of material to go through.
Absolutely.
And we're happy to answer any questions, as it comes up, so.
I appreciate that very much. Do any other members have any questions? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate
Thank
your
you very
time.
much.
Thank you.
And we can reach you through Mr. Martello if we have any
Yes,
questions.
he has our emails and phone numbers.
Perfect.
Right.
Thank you so much. Oh,
Thanks a
I do
lot.
have one more question.
Sure.
How many years have we been with your firm? 3?
One with E.B. Smith and 2 with Jeff, I believe. Maybe we had 2 with 8, so it might be 4.
Okay, and I know that we discussed in the past that we keep that try and do that on a rotating basis. Do you guys have a mechanism within your firm? Does it count if a different auditor comes? Is that considered a fresh point of view for, just keeping with best practice in audits?
So I have a GAO study. This comes up a lot, right? And KD would tell you that, they recommend that you switch auditors. The GAO would say, we've done a review with publicly traded entities, and what they recommend is partner rotation, not necessarily auditor rotation, because when you change auditors, you don't necessarily change your attorney, your engineer, every time. There is institutional knowledge that's inside of our files. You know what I mean? That we're just one team. We have 2 other teams to go around, so it would be easy to move to a different audit team, but they would have the benefit of in-depth what our work papers, what our internal control systems are, right? So you find that what they found was that fraud occurs more often when you have rotation of audit firms, because you lose that institutional knowledge. After 4 years of watching your system and learning your system, the opportunity for us to recognize something abnormal or out of the ordinary is much better than somebody else that's walking in. So what you do is you look at maybe getting a different audit partner who says, I want to look at these areas differently, and I want to test this a little bit. This one, I want to do more detailed testing here, a little less detailed testing over here. So you get a different flavor, but you keep the institutional knowledge.
Okay, thank you. I remember discussing that, and I remember,
Yeah, I've got audits since 1994, 1995 for some of those school districts up in northern Kentucky, so known them a long time. But that's what we do, is we rotate those partners to do that.
And with discussing with Jeff, as throughout the process, I mentioned a few times that we do have a concurring reviewer, and it is somebody that's different each time. So a fresh set of eyes on the financial statements as a whole, taking a bird's eye view of everything going on. So there are times where things are caught there, but I think it's important to know that we do have that in place.
That is great to know.
Yeah,
Thank you so
the other
much.
3 teams that we talk about, it's another partner that does school district audits that will look at this audit like I will look at other school district audits and say, hey, this looks odd here. So we take our job seriously.
Very good. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is Mr. Martello, you're up again for our treasurer's report and the October financial report. Is there anything you would like to add from last week, or? All right, is there a motion to approve the treasurer's report and October financial report?
So moved.
There's a motion by Ms. Glass. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Ms. McHale. All those in favor say
I have a
aye.
couple questions
Okay, so
first.
I'm sorry.
That's okay,
Go
that's
ahead.
okay. I was just waiting for the discussion
Yeah,
portion.
absolutely. I'm sorry.
Mr. Martello, I did have just a couple questions. The first one is with the fiscal year 21 projected ending tentative contingency. I noticed that's around 7.2 million, and I noticed that's an increase of around 3 million over last year's ending contingency. And so I was wondering where that $3 million is coming from.
Well, if you recall, there was an approved budget deficit last year, $2.6 million. So that's why the 4 million figure was reflected in that contingency. But we had some different factors, but the positive thing is the year by itself ended in the black. And so you are going to see a difference from one year to the next because of the prudent action that happened last fiscal year.
I may not be asking the question correctly. So when the fiscal year ended, in fiscal year 21, according to our monthly statements, our contingency was $4,083,675. So now that's gone up to $7,245,000. So that's a $3 million increase in some money from somewhere that's projected to move over into contingency.
Because last year, the projected ending contingency was going to have a shortfall at the beginning of the year with that budget deficit. But what happened is the district did not end up in that manner. And so that's the net of those numbers in conjunction with the rollover balance at the end of the fiscal year.
So again, not projected, not what we thought might happen but didn't happen. What happened was it ended. The ending balance was $4,083,675. That was the end, not projected, not we thought we might lose this, but we added that, but we didn't do this. That was the actual number that it ended. That was the contingency. So that was the ending balance of the contingency. And so now I just noticed that it looks like it's kind of gone up by 3 million. I guess I don't know that we had an increase in revenue other than ESSER. So I guess, I'm wondering, are we moving or planning to move around $3 million in ESSER funds to end this fiscal year over in contingency, I guess is my question?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So that was my first question. My second question just has to do with, at last week's meeting, we talked about, and there was a public comment about the community forum. And so I wondered if we have been able to schedule that meeting between the architect and the teachers to discuss their concerns.
In terms of the community forum,
Yes.
that is not, I know that wasn't through the channel of myself in terms of setting up that community forum.
I think that's more a question for the Value Engineering Committee versus Mr. Martello.
Okay, well, it was just on one of the slides, so that's why I was just asking, is there any way we could discuss that and get that scheduled? I think people are interested in knowing if that meeting's going to occur and kind of when, give some notice to the teachers or...
Yes, I have sent out emails to get the value engineering committee availability to set that meeting. And I think that the parent or the teacher meeting would come as a result of the next value engineering meeting.
Yeah, I would say there are several action items that need to be discussed by the Value Engineering Committee as a result of the community forum, and that would be included in that.
That sounds great. Do you have any dates or?
We're looking at, bear with me here. The first week, either the week of November 29th through December 3rd is the week we're looking at.
Gotcha. Okay, well, thank you. And then I'd also had a request from some constituents about those meetings possibly being recorded, because sometimes they said there's late notice and they can't get there in person, so I just wanted to pass that along. All right, well, I appreciate that information. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Is there any further comment or discussion? All right, then there's a motion and a second to approve the treasurer's report and the October financial report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
I was actually going to vote nay.
I'm sorry.
That's
I thought
okay.
I heard you speak. I'm sorry.
No, it's hard, I know, with masks. And I did just want to explain my vote.
Sure.
I think as long as we're using ESSER money to supplant the general fund, I'm not going to be able to approve this item on the agenda.
Okay. So then the motion passes 4-1 with Ms. Springate voting nay.
Thank you.
Sure. I apologize. I thought I misheard you there. The next item.
I was just wondering if anybody wanted to explain why they voted yes. You know, Ms. Springate likes to take the opportunity to explain. Does anyone else want to explain?
No, thank you.
Okay.
All right. The next item on the agenda is the audience, or opportunity for audience and public comment. And we do have one person signed up to speak. Ms. Nance, if you would like to come up. And Ms. Nance has requested to speak on treasurer's report and board meetings in 2022.
Oh, yeah. Me neither. I can't get my phone open. I'm ready when you are. Ready?
I'm going to start off tonight by can you hear me, first of all?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to start off tonight by referencing a recent news story about the building of a new middle school in Lexington that was projected to cost $49.2 million, but due to inflation came in significantly higher at $70 million. Board member, this is our current situation, and everyone in Woodford County is talking about it. People are wondering how much longer the board will keep spending taxpayer dollars on a project that we clearly can't afford. People are wondering how many millions of taxpayer dollars have already been spent on a building with major design issues that have been raised repeatedly but are yet to be addressed or discussed in an open meeting. People, including the staff, are wondering if the board is going to intervene in the current plan of hoarding ESSER funds to pad the general fund for a new high school instead of using the money to support the needs of our students. Also, people are wondering how long it will be until the public is completely shut out of the decision-making process altogether. We see you shifting discussions to committee meetings, we see you moving to one meeting per month, and we predict that you will soon stop streaming the meetings online. Finally, and most importantly, people are wondering when this board will finally put aside personal agendas and place the focus on the children of Woodford County. What the people are saying is that it is time for you to stop, pivot, and regroup. You can begin this evening by, number 1, discussing inflation and how this will impact current decisions of this board. Number 2, questioning the district's use of ESSER 3 funds, which, by the way, teachers, you need to stand up, use your voices, and demand that this money be used for its intended purpose, or they're going to steal it from you. It says so hidden in plain sight on page 18 of the district's ARP ESSER plan, where they also lied about the common response of the stakeholder survey. I have the proof right here. If all of you rise up and band together as a united force, they cannot retaliate against all of you. They need you, and you are the majority. Number 3, recognize, acknowledge, and discuss the concerns of the new high school design. Number 4, and most importantly, discuss the true and actual results of the Parent, Student, and Staff ARPS or Stakeholder Survey, which is to address the significant academic and mental health needs of our students as a result of the pandemic. Last week's meeting lasted 40 minutes. At the close of the meeting, I heard a board member say, "Wow, good meeting." Please know that this is not the public's perception of a good meeting. We want authentic, genuine discussion about important issues that matter. We are not interested in quick board meetings where you just go through the motions and tell us only what you want us to know or what you think we want to hear. In closing, let me remind this board that you work for us, we the people. And we want the truth, we want the facts, and we want transparency. We want to know that our input matters and that our concerns are being addressed and not ignored. We are begging you to please have some integrity and start doing the job that you are elected to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nance.
You're welcome.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve, or would any member like any item pulled out and voted on separately? All right, then I'll ask, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
There's a motion by Ms. Springate. Is there a second? The board, or the chair will second that. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion opposed, I'll do that from now on. The motion passes 5-0. The next item is the regular agenda. Item A is to accept notification of personnel matters. Is there a motion to accept?
So moved.
There's a motion by Ms. Springate. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Glass. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 5-0. The next item is to accept notification of payment of bills. Is there a motion to accept?
So moved.
There's a motion by Ms. Springate. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Ms. McHale. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 5-0. Item C is to approve the meeting minutes of the October 25th, 2021 board meeting. All were in attendance. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
There's a motion by Ms. Springate and a second by Ms. McHale. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 5-0. Item D, approve the meeting minutes of the October 26th, 2021 board meeting. Ms. Richardson was absent that night, but can still vote to approve the minutes, as I'm sure she has reviewed them. Is there a motion to approve?
So,
There's a motion by Ms. McHale. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second by Ms. You shall henceforth be called Ms. McGlass. By Ms. Glass. Is there any discussion?
I did have one question.
Sure.
I was at the meeting until it ended and stayed after and spoke with folks and then left. So I'm not sure if the minutes should say I wasn't there at the end or if something happened after I left. I'm not clear on that.
Notes indicated that there was only 3 members there at the very end of the meeting.
when we voted to, that was at the community forum. Yeah, so before we actually took the vote to close, you were not there for the vote.
Okay.
It was just nothing substantive had happened. I just hadn't called for a vote on the board members to adjourn.
And
Okay,
we
well, I just
started
wanted to check,
cleaning
'cause
up
I
and,
stayed
no,
after
no, it was
and
just-
visited with folks,
just
and
the
they were taking
parliamentary-
down the things,
Yeah.
and I'm like, the meeting was clearly over, people
Yeah,
left.
we had forgotten to actually adjourn it.
Okay, thank you, I just wanted to clarify that.
Sure. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The minutes are approved by a vote of 5-0. Item E is to approve the audit report that we've been given tonight. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
There's a motion by Ms. McHale. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Glass. Is there any discussion?
I just must have misunderstood what happened earlier. I thought we were going to maybe table this until December so that we would have time to email questions and ask questions
I
and
did-
get clarification.
It wasn't my intention when I mentioned that to table the approval of the audit. It was just that I would like a chance to add it as a discussion item for next month, just so we have time, because we got it so late today, through no fault of anyone, I just would like time to review it and discuss it if I do have questions, and any other board member would be offered the same opportunity.
I guess I would just ask that we table it until December so that we could have those discussions and ask those questions. It just doesn't feel right to approve something and then come back and maybe have questions later and you're not really sure what's in there. And it was clearly a huge document, and we just received it. So I would just be more comfortable if we waited and did the approval.
Is there any
next
type
month.
of an issue, Mr. Martello, that we don't approve?
Yeah.
Or really, it's not even really approving it, was it?
Yes, it's
Acceptance.
more, it's,
Yeah.
yes, the
You
clearinghouse
can't
is-
change it.
You can't change
You
it
can't
if you're
change the
hiring a third
outcome, so
party,
you either
so,
accept it or
yes,
you don't.
it's,
Is there some, is there?
yeah, the deadline is today for the 15th, the National Clearinghouse, and, but yes, that's the reflection.
So an action is
Preferably,
required
yes.
today to accept the audit.
I would-
But any follow-up questions, mine were questions about information that we have provided to them just on a cursory
Correct.
reading.
Yes.
Yeah, there is literally nothing we can say to change
can't
anything
change
in
it.
this report.
Absolutely.
Nothing. So no questions, nothing.
Yes.
So we either accept that they did the review and have their opinion, or we don't. So I'm not sure what other questions we could ask that would
Correct.
make us
Nothing-
change that. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's just not how an audit works.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I do appreciate the clarification. I just am uncomfortable approving anything that I haven't read. So maybe that's just me. It might just be a personal thing.
Okay, is there any, we have a motion and a second. Okay, is there any further discussion?
And what are the implications if it's not approved, if we do not vote to accept this audit today?
Mr.
Well-
Martello?
I've never had that happen before, so I couldn't tell you.
Mr. Chenoweth?
I really wouldn't know.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that happening either. It is, from my point of view, it's very similar to the notification of personnel matters. The board can't do anything to change it,
Right.
but you're obligated to receive it and note in your minutes that you've received it.
And we're more voting to accept that we've received the report.
That the external auditor has completed their work and
Yeah.
delivered their report to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion?
No, I would just like to note just the comment that we talked about during the audit review of how they review revenue and expenses, and that includes any transaction up through November. So that includes any of the restatements that were done for ESSER. And I want to make sure the community understands that an external audit opinion has deemed that everything was appropriate. There was nothing inappropriate about any restatement of ESSER. There was nothing inappropriate about how we coded our expenses. That was all by a third party deemed to be within all the reasonable guidance of all of those funds. So I appreciate that, and I think that's good information for the community to understand.
Absolutely, and at this is a good time for us to say thank you to all
Yes.
of our staff that worked so hard. Audits are never fun, and they cause angst and
Yes.
heartburn. And Mr. Martello, we appreciate your work on this as well as that of your staff.
Even our school staffs.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
all the
everybody-
bookkeepers
yeah,
at the
absolutely.
individual
Information as
schools.
well. Their bookkeepers are just as involved in this as anybody else.
Sure, and I'd like to reiterate the same thing. I'm just one person and have the privilege of leading a great group, and coming in after the start of a fiscal year, I couldn't have done it without my team, as well as support all around in the central office administration. And I'm proud. I'm proud that we didn't have one material finding, as reflected was tonight, with and I'll also make this statement again. I'd have to do the math, but we had 4 individuals, we had 4 individuals of turnover. Our entire payroll department was brand new last year, with not one person having payroll experience. So I'm proud of what we did and what we did as a team. So thank you.
Well, and having the auditors who do this day in and day out be so complimentary of how efficient everything was, that's very nice to hear. And I hope that you'll pass that along to your folks and tell them that we're also very appreciative of that.
Absolutely. Thank you very
I
much.
think that's the data of 20 other districts as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I would just add that I think we have great staff and they do a great job, but I would just note that this is a particular type of audit for a particular thing, and the auditor was clear that it was not an internal control audit and it was not a fraud audit. So I think it's important to kind of just realize what the audit is looking for and what it captures.
Yep, I think
but
they
I
were
definitely
very clear
appreciate
about
our
that.
staff, and I think our staff did a great job too, so thank you.
Okay, all those in favor of approving and accepting the audit report, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 5-0. The next item is approving the WCHS emergency structural bleachers repair construction documents. And again, Mr. Martello shared with us last week that this is a step in the process that KDE requires us to take. Is there a motion to approve those documents?
So moved.
There's a motion by Ms. Springate. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a second by Ms. Glass. Is there any discussion?
I would just like to ask if there's a chance, Mr. Martello, that you could kind of put together a project timeline for the bleacher repair, just something like when bids would go out, when we expect the repair. I just want to make sure we stay on top of it and that the bleachers are repaired before the kids come back to school in August, because it's just such a huge part of, being a high school student. Thank you.
All right, is there any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the construction documents, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 5-0. There is no old business or board member communications. The
I
next,
actually did have something for board member communications tonight.
okay.
I just wanted to say that I know we've all received an email regarding KDE memo that was circulated to all board members and different staff, I guess. And I just want to say for the record that I knew nothing of the content of that email prior to it being sent by Michelle Nance. And I do think it's important that we all go on record saying if we have any knowledge of that information in the KDE memo, or if we had any conversations with Ross Torrent regarding it's a CTE recommendation, square foot recommendation memo. I find it extremely concerning. I guess January, I requested that a standing agenda item be added because I realized that there were just a multitude of communications that were going on outside of meetings and weren't being shared with all board members. And so I guess I just would like if we could all just, acknowledge if we've had any conversations, if we've had that information, any conversations with the architect regarding the CTE space recommendations. Again, I have not.
I think that Ms. Cooper complied with an open records request, and they checked all of the district email accounts and found that there was not any communication by any board member with regard to that communication that Ms. Nance shared.
Okay, well, I just wanted to go on record. I just want to be clear when I get communications from folks and they raise issues. I just want to make sure that I'm answering and being, just above board and honest and transparent and everything. So that was the only thing I had for board member communications.
All right, thank you. The next item is a discussion item, and it is for board meetings for the calendar year 2022. And I had mentioned at the last meeting, asking that we discuss the possibility of moving to a single meeting schedule for next year. Is there any discussion that you guys would like to add after having time to think that over?
I would like to, could Mr. Chenoweth weigh in on what statutorily we are obligated to do and what we...
The only statutory obligation is to have at least one monthly meeting. And even that yields to emergencies where occasionally, if you only have one regular meeting scheduled and for some reason inclement weather or whatever else, there are boards that sometimes have that meeting made up the following month. So if you miss the November meeting because of some unforeseen circumstance, you end up meeting twice in December and kind of making up for it. But statutory obligation is one meeting a month.
Thank you.
And going to this, if we were to vote to approve one meeting a month, it would not mean that if any special reason we could not call a planning meeting if we felt like we needed it during a budget session or for some particular topic that was coming up, right?
Absolutely.
There's
And
probably
my
one
expectation
board
is,
chair and 3 board members.
Yeah.
my expectation is that we would have at least 3, a data meeting when we, for our academic matters, and then budget work sessions as well.
Yeah.
And those can be added. And there are times that an emergency meeting is going to need to be held to vote to approve things that our students need or our staff needs. That's going to happen. But a single board meeting schedule, like I pointed out last time, may be an opportunity for us to be a little bit more prudent with the time. You know, the hope was that with a planning meeting and a regular meeting, that week is used in between to seek further clarification and edification on any matters that are on the agenda. And we still would have that opportunity with receiving the agenda and supporting documents a week in advance and just not having the formal meeting.
I think it's also important to note that every time we meet as a board, just to have our board members in a meeting, it costs our district or our taxpayers $700, I believe, roughly. So, you know, it was pointed out that last week we had a meeting, we were only there for 40 minutes. We all got paid to be at that meeting, doing the same work that we could have done. And basically what we did tonight in the meeting, what we discussed, we had all of the information that we could work with and do the meeting in one night. So if you figure $700 times 12 meetings that we're possibly cutting out, that saves the district roughly $8,400 a year in tax revenue money that we're spending to have our board members there. We get paid for every educational event we go to, every meeting. So, you know, for me, it makes sense if we're just spending 30, 40 minutes in our planning meeting to do it all in one meeting and save money. So I think it's important to point that out as well.
Well, I do think that when you go to KDE train or KSBA trainings, they're really clear that 2 meetings a month is best practices. The reason, I think, some of the reasons are that, number one, it allows you to have that planning meeting and get the information early. It allows you to discuss it as a board, because we're not supposed to be having discussions about school board business or agenda items outside of a meeting. So it allows us to do that in a meeting so that, number one, the public knows what's going on. Number two, it gives the newspaper time to publish that information in case someone has, a constituent wants to reach out. And then it also allows the district to give us that information and let us have time to ask questions or ask questions at the meeting. And I think another point is that it's very, very hard to schedule a meeting with 5 different people's schedule, an attorney's schedule, the staff schedule. It's much, much easier just to have those already on the book. And I do believe that when I was looking at different districts, how they did it, most districts do the 2 meetings a month, and all of the top performing districts seem to be doing 2 meetings a month. And again, once we get through COVID, that meeting also allows us to actually go into the school once a month and then be able to conduct business. So I don't think it's a norm for us to have super, super short meetings. I think it's probably best to err on having a set schedule versus trying to get a schedule together. And then the other thing is, it seems easy just to kind of schedule a meeting and get a quorum. But if you don't have that on your calendar a year in advance, it can be difficult. And again, if you have a meeting, you can bring up items that come up, such as bills, such as emergency repairs, all those different kinds of things that might not just fall at the calendar date that we have scheduled for that month. And then the last thing is just that, again, all these meetings should be done open. We should be having discussions publicly. And in order to do that, we have to actually be together to do that. We can't send emails. We can't get together, behind the scenes and do all that. It has to be done, right here. And so, while it does, there's a per diem of $150 per member for the meetings, there are many, many, many other ways that we spend $750 throughout the month that probably would be more prudent to kind of cut some of that out. Expense-wise might make a little bit more sense. So that's just my 2 cents. I know, other people have other opinions and ideas. I just think it's always best to have meetings scheduled, number one. And number two, I think it's better for our constituents for us to have, 2 meetings a month and to have open discussion, and also to be able to put that information in the paper so that folks know what we're doing. I think that's just really important. So, thank you.
And I would also like to say that, I'm not suggesting by any means that any of our board members are emailing each other or having side discussions that Ms. Springate continually likes to suggest in meetings. I feel very confident that my fellow board members have been on the up and up with that. I haven't had any conversations with anyone outside of the meetings that were inappropriate or that had any dealings with any of our meetings. I think we've been very transparent. I could sit here and go on for 5 minutes as well, but I think that from what I've seen, there are many other districts that only have 1 meeting a month. It's very rare that we ever actually only have 2 meetings a month, to be quite honest. And, receiving the information well over a week before our actual regular meeting and even before the planning meeting, it seems to be plenty of time for any of us to research, contact the correct people that we need to contact, and then have full transparency at our public meeting, which we do. I think it's obvious what's going on. We can decide to have 1 meeting like many other districts do, or we can have 2 meetings. Either way is fine with me, but to suggest that there's behind the scenes discussions going on between board members at every single meeting is really becoming a problem, I believe. The more you say something, the more the public hears it, the more chance there is for them to believe it. And, there have been open requests or open meeting requests sent out, and we've complied with those. And obviously there has been no situation where anyone has done anything wrong. So I want to make that clear. And Ms. Springate also agreed last week that she voted to put on the agenda that we only have 1 meeting a week or a month. So I don't understand what the problem is this week.
Well, I would just like to just briefly say that having a discussion is always a good thing. So my agreeing to add an agenda item doesn't mean I'm voting one way or the other. And number 2, having the meetings and having us here discussing that, what I'm saying is that would prevent us doing things behind the scenes through email or through communications, because we're at a table able to discuss it. So we're running an entire school district, and to only have 2 meetings a month, I don't think is asking too much. That's all I was saying, and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Glass, do you have any input?
I don't have that. I'm fine either way. I feel like I get all the information I need well within a week in advance. If I have questions in between, I can do it. So I'm fine with moving to 1 meeting a month. I feel like it would, be a time saver, especially our district staff. They have to come here twice a month as well after long days. I feel like I get everything I need to come prepared for a meeting. So.
Well, and I think that the assertion that the meetings are too short is exactly the opposite of the thought process in considering this. Our meetings are long. Typically, both meetings are long. And you're right, we do need to be considerate of our district employees and of Mr. Gibson's time coming here every week and setting up things, and Ms. Cooper setting up everything for the board to then have a long planning meeting and a long regular meeting.
And I believe that most of the time they are the exact same meetings. Most of the discussion is exactly the same for both of those meetings.
So I guess we will need to vote on a calendar in December for the upcoming year. Because this is a discussion item, I guess what we'll do is if you could prepare a 1 meeting schedule as well as a 2 meeting schedule, and we can take a look at that in December, and people can vote according to which way they feel is the best direction. And I think that allows each board member an equal voice in this process.
Can I just ask, Mr. Chenoweth, what is your experience with the other school districts that you represent? Are they typically 2 meetings?
I have not had reason to look at that across the 2.5 dozen districts that I represent.
Mm-hmm.
There are a handful, certainly, that have 2 meetings a month pre-built into their schedule the way you all have. and there are a handful that just have the traditional one meeting a month. I think there's at least one district that I represent that has their work session the night of the board meeting, so that they kind of can come in and ask questions ahead of, the public can watch that, can attend that, but there's kind of a discussion session late afternoon before the formal board meeting, so they're only getting paid, because you only get the per diem for the day, not for the meeting.
So that's interesting. So they have a work session that they ask questions, the public can listen, but it's not an open.
It is a public meeting, I'm
Yeah.
just saying, it's in the afternoon, so not as
Yeah.
many citizens show up for that, but it's still a public meeting, and I think it's recorded. But then later on,
Okay.
they have the business meeting.
Gotcha. Okay.
Thinking about your comment, Ms. Bringate, I wasn't aware that KSBA had a best practice recommendation on this. Is that?
It's in every single training you go to about meetings, and I have slides from them. But yeah, they absolutely, every training I've been to has said that 2 meetings a month is the gold standard, and they recommend that one of those meetings be in the actual schools. Kind of the pattern, the calendar that we've adopted in Woodford. And so that's what they said. And then the other thing is, I didn't forgot to say this earlier. I just, I don't mind coming to a meeting that lasts a little bit long, but it's really hard to stay for a long meeting. And I'm afraid that this is going to make, the one meeting a month, it's not going to decrease in time. It's just going to add those two together. So we're going to have 3 and 4, God forbid, longer meetings, which is unfortunate. I think side effect of taking 2 meetings down to 1. I think it might increase the actual time of that one meeting. So.
Okay. All right, is there any further discussion? We will move on, and thank you all. We, I believe, have a need to go into an executive session. What we can do is go ahead and announce that there will be no board action after the executive session except to adjourn. So everyone is free to go, and the board will move into executive session, and then
That motion needs to be under 61.810(1)(c) to discuss pending litigation.
all right, is there a motion to go into executive session pursuant to 61.810(1)(c)?
So moved.
There's a motion by Ms. Springate. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a second by Ms. Glass. Ms. Richardson, we will add you in a manner. I will see if I can create a thing on my Chromebook real quickly, and we'll get you looped in before we begin. All those in favor of moving into executive session,
Aye.
say aye. 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 Opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Good time for a bathroom break?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Is there more than this that was given? Because our super's gonna check on you. There were
I
another.
think it's just one set, so I took a picture and passed it around the whole thing.
Oh, is that different
Oh,
than
it's
what
just,
I
I
had?
thought
I
she
think
had,
is it one set, or can you?
What's that?
I don't know.
I'm gonna shut all this stuff down.
Can we go ahead and start while we have a few minutes and we start
Yeah.
wrapping up?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I will have.
Cause I actually need to put the stuff in that room if y'all are going to.
Can they do executive session in here?
Yeah, it's true. I was wondering about that, but I wasn't sure. What cameras we have, because I'm sure there's school cameras in this library. No, actually, in this one there's not. Middle school, yes, but here, no.